Have you ever wondered what happens to your debts when you pass away? Will it vanish? Will your assets be taken? Or will someone else be held responsible? Debt and its implications after death can be surrounded by misconceptions and confusion, leaving you wondering about the fate of your debts once you're gone. Do your debts miraculously disappear upon your demise, or do they burden your loved ones? In this video, we will delve into the truth behind this common misconception and shed light on the complexities that can arise when dealing with debt after death. One of the most general misconceptions is that your debt automatically vanishes when you pass away. However, the truth is that your debts do not simply disappear upon your death. In reality, the responsibility for repaying the debts typically falls on your assets. When you pass away, your assets include all your money, property, and possessions. The debts owed by you are typically paid out of these assets. If your assets hold sufficient funds to cover the debts, they will be settled accordingly. However, the debts may go unpaid if your assets lack the necessary resources. When it comes to the responsibility for your debts after your death, the general understanding is that they primarily fall on your assets. However, the reality is a lot more complex. Here are some important factors for you to consider. In certain cases, individuals may share legal responsibility for their debt. For instance, if someone co-signed a loan or acted as a joint account holder with you, they may become liable for the outstanding balance. They must understand the terms of any joint financial agreement to determine their potential liability. In some jurisdictions, community property laws dictate that certain debts incurred during a marriage may be the joint responsibility of both spouses. These laws can vary, so it is essential to consult legal regulations to understand the impact of debt after death. If you engage in proactive asset planning, may employ trusts to protect your assets from creditors after your death. By transferring your ownership of assets to a trust, it may be possible to mitigate the impact of debt on your asset and its distribution. The probate process, which validates your will and oversees the distribution of your assets after your death, plays a crucial role in determining how debts are handled. During probate, creditors are allowed to make claims against the asset, and the court establishes a priority for their repayment. If your assets lack sufficient funds to cover your debts after your death, your debts may go unpaid. In such cases, creditors may need to write off the debt or pursue alternative avenues to recover their losses. In most cases, your surviving family members, including your spouses, are not personally responsible for the debts incurred by you. However, there are exceptions to this general rule. If your surviving individual shares responsibility for a debt as a co-signer or joint account holder, he may become liable for the remaining balance. That is why it is crucial to understand the terms of any shared financial agreements and seek legal advice if necessary. As mentioned earlier, community property laws can influence the liability of your surviving spouses for certain debts incurred during the marriage. Understanding the specific regulations in your jurisdiction is vital to determine their possible responsibility. If you appoint someone as the executor or administrator of your asset, he will have legal obligations to handle your affairs, including managing your debts. However, it is important to note that the responsibility for debt repayment lies with the asset rather than someone else's finances. After your death, it is not uncommon for debt collectors to contact your surviving family members or individuals overseeing the asset. However, it is crucial to know the rights. Debt collectors are prohibited from suggesting or implying that your surviving loved ones should be held personally responsible for paying your debts using their funds if they're not legally liable for the debts. They must not deceive or mislead your loved ones regarding their obligations. It's always illegal for debt collectors to harass or intimidate your surviving family member when attempting to collect a debt. Your family has the right to be treated fairly and respectfully during these interactions. But what if you are the one burdened with paying the debt of your deceased loved ones? When are you liable or not liable for repaying the debt? While it is generally true that you are not responsible for repaying the debts of a deceased person, there are certain situations where you may be held liable. Let's explore these scenarios. One of the primary reasons you may find yourself responsible for a deceased person's debt is if you acted as a cosigner on a loan. By cosigning, you assumed joint liability for the debt, making you equally responsible for its repayment. It is essential to understand that co-signing signifies a legal agreement to take on the financial obligation if the primary borrower defaults. Distinguishing between being a joint account holder and an authorized user is crucial. If you are a joint account holder on a credit card with the deceased person, you share equal responsibility for any outstanding debt on the card. As a joint account holder, you are considered an owner of the account and are legally obligated to repay the debt. In specific circumstances, state laws may require surviving spouses to assume responsibility for certain types of debt incurred during the marriage. These laws vary by jurisdiction, and it is essential to consult local regulations to determine your potential liability. It is worth noting that not all states impose spousal responsibility for a deceased person's debt. Another factor to consider is if you have been appointed as the executor or administrator of the deceased person's asset. You may have a legal obligation to pay outstanding bills using a jointly owned property. This responsibility arises from specific state laws governing asset administration. It is crucial to understand the requirements established by your state to determine your liability accurately. If you are a surviving spouse residing in a community property state, such as Alaska with a special agreement, Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, or Wisconsin, you may be obligated to use jointly held property to settle the debts of a deceased spouse. Community property laws impose shared responsibility on both spouses for debts incurred during the marriage, even in the absence of explicit joint agreements. Despite the preceding scenarios where you may be held liable for a deceased person's debt, it is crucial to recognize the instances where you are not responsible for repayment. Let's explore these important exceptions. In general, if you did not co-sign a loan or act as a joint account holder on the deceased person's credit card, you are typically not personally responsible for repaying their debts. The primary responsibility lies with the deceased person's assets, which should utilize his assets to settle outstanding obligations. Unless specific state laws mandate spousal responsibility or community property laws are in effect, surviving spouses are generally not obligated to repay the debts of their deceased partners. Each state has its laws and regulations, and it is crucial to consult local statutes to understand your rights and obligations accurately. Being an authorized user on a credit card does not make you personally liable for the debt. As an authorized user, you have permission to use the card, but you do not share in the legal responsibility for repayment. The primary responsibility for repayment rests with the deceased person's assets. If the debt is solely in the deceased person's name, and you neither co-signed nor shared joint responsibility, the debt remains the obligation of the deceased person's asset. Creditors must pursue repayment from the assets within the asset, and you are generally not personally liable for the debt. It is essential to be aware of the statute of limitations for collecting debts. Over time, debts may become unenforceable due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. Once the statute of limitations is passed, creditors lose the ability to pursue legal action for debt repayment. The length of the statute of limitations varies based on jurisdiction and the type of debt involved. Familiarizing yourself with the relevant laws can help you determine if you are still liable for a deceased person's debt. Finally, it is important to recognize the factors that may make you responsible for a deceased person's debt. However, it is equally important to appreciate your circumstances and understand that financial responsibility is not always absolute. Take a moment to reflect on your situation and be grateful for what you have. We appreciate the time you've spent watching this video and hope it has provided you with valuable insights. If you like this video, then you're in for a treat with another video of us to help you navigate the complexities of personal finance.